The contract crackled in Alara's trembling hands, the official Silverpine pack seal still warm from the wax. She stared at her father's signature, sloppy, desperate, reeking of whiskey, and felt her world collapse. "You sold me." The words came out as a whisper, then louder. "You actually sold me to them." Marcus Sullivan swayed on his feet, eyes bloodshot and avoiding hers. "It's not selling, it's an arrangement. A good one. The Blackwoods have money, status. They're not even our pack." Alara's voice cracked. At 22, she'd managed to avoid the bonding contracts that trapped most Omega females, believing her father when he said he'd never force her into one. "The Blackwoods are practically royalty. They don't want me, Papa. They want breeding stock. Don't be dramatic." But his hands shook as he reached for the bottle on the kitchen table. 700,000, Alara. That's what your contract was worth. It pays off everything, the gambling debts, the mortgage on this place, everything. 700,000. The number hit her like a physical blow. She was worth exactly what her father owed to men who would break his legs if he didn't pay. "Pack law says," she started. "Pack law says you honor the contract." Alpha Morrison's voice filled the doorway. Alara's stomach dropped. The Alpha never came to their shabby house unless something was seriously wrong. "The papers are signed and witnessed. The Blackwoods sent a car." Through the window, Alara saw it, a sleek black sedan that cost more than most pack members made in a year. Her fate, waiting in the driveway. "Please," she whispered. "There has to be another way." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "The Blackwoods aren't cruel, Alara. They're different, but they honor their agreements. You'll be well cared for." Well cared for. Like a prize animal. An hour later, she sat in the back of the sedan with a single suitcase, watching the Silverpine territory disappear behind her. The driver, a stone-faced man who smelled faintly of wolf, hadn't spoken a word. They drove for 3 hours through increasingly remote wilderness until massive iron gates came into view. The Blackwood estate was nothing like she'd imagined. It wasn't just a mansion, it was a fortress of dark stone and towering windows, surrounded by walls that seemed designed to keep things in rather than out. Ancient oaks cast everything in shadow, and she swore she could feel eyes watching from the upper floors. "Miss Sullivan." A woman in a crisp gray uniform waited at the entrance. "I'm Mrs. Hartwell, the head of household staff. Mr. Blackwood is waiting for you in the library." The interior was all dark wood and heavy furniture, expensive but cold. Their footsteps echoed as they walked down a hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women, generations of Blackwoods with the same piercing dark eyes. Mrs. Hartwell stopped at massive double doors. "A word of advice, dear. Mr. Blackwood values directness. Don't waste his time with pleasantries." The library was enormous, filled with leather-bound books that stretched to a vaulted ceiling. At first, Alara thought it was empty. Then she heard the soft whir of wheels on wood. Adrian Blackwood emerged from behind a towering bookshelf, and Alara's breath caught. Even seated in his wheelchair, he commanded the space. Dark hair, sharp features, and those family eyes that seemed to see straight through her. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, and devastatingly handsome in a way that made her feel foolish for staring. He stopped several feet away, studying her with the same detached interest he might show a piece of art he was considering purchasing. "Alara Sullivan." His voice was crisp, educated, with just a hint of warmth that somehow made it worse. 22 years old, no higher education, no particular skills listed in your file. Tell me, what exactly did my family pay $700,000 for? Heat flooded her cheeks. "I didn't ask for this." "Neither did I." He wheeled closer, and she caught his scent, pine and something darker, wilder. It made her wolf stir uneasily. "But here we are, bound by a contract neither of us wanted. The question is what we do about it. I could refuse to honor it." Adrian's laugh was sharp. "And bring dishonor to your pack?" Have your father beaten to death by his creditors? I think not. He gestured to a chair. Sit. We need to establish some ground rules. Elara remained standing. Such as? This is a business arrangement, nothing more. You're here to produce an heir, preferably male, definitely strong enough to carry on the Blackwood line. In exchange, you'll live comfortably, want for nothing, and receive a substantial settlement when our contract ends. When it ends? When you've given me a son, or when 5 years have passed. Whichever comes first. His tone was matter of fact, as if they were discussing stock options. Until then, you'll live in the East Wing. Mrs. Hartwell will show you to your rooms. The East Wing? Something cold twisted in her stomach. Is there a problem with that? No. I just thought. She trailed off, not sure what she thought. That they'd share a room? That he'd pretend this was a real mating? Adrian's expression didn't change. You thought what, exactly? Nothing. She lifted her chin. Will I be allowed to leave the estate? Within reason. You're not a prisoner, Miss Sullivan. You're an investment. He turned his wheelchair away. Mrs. Hartwell will explain the household rules. I trust you'll find everything satisfactory. And if I don't? He paused, glancing back at her. For just a moment, something flickered in his dark eyes, something that made her wolf whimper and her pulse race. Then I suggest you learn to adapt quickly. The Blackwood family doesn't tolerate disappointment well. Mrs. Hartwell appeared as if summoned, her smile polite but distant. This way, dear. As they left the library, Elara heard Adrian's wheelchair moving again, the sound fading into the vast silence of the house. Her hands were shaking, whether from fear or anger, she couldn't tell. The East Wing has lovely views, Mrs. Hartwell chatted as they climbed a grand staircase. Very quiet. You'll hardly be disturbed. Disturbed by what? The older woman's step faltered almost imperceptibly. By the household staff, of course. We're quite busy during the day. They walked down a long corridor lined with windows that looked out over dark woods. Elara's rooms were beautiful, a sitting area, bedroom, and private bath decorated in soft blues and creams. Far nicer than anywhere she'd ever lived. And far lonelier. Dinner is served at 7, Mrs. Hartwell said. Will you be joining Mr. Blackwood? I don't know. Am I supposed to? That's entirely up to you, dear. He usually dines alone. She moved toward the door. Oh, and Miss Sullivan? The East Wing can be quite active at night. Old houses, you know. Settling sounds. Best to keep your door locked and perhaps use some earplugs. Elara stared at her. Active how? But Mrs. Hartwell was already gone, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Alone in her gilded cage, Elara sank into a chair by the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grounds. Somewhere in the distance, she could swear she heard something howling, low and mournful and definitely not human. She thought of Adrian's dismissive tone, his cold calculation, the way he'd called her an investment. Then she thought of his scent, the way her wolf had reacted to his presence. There was something he wasn't telling her about his accident, about this house, about why the Blackwood family needed her specifically. As full darkness settled over the estate, the howling grew louder. It seemed to come from directly below her rooms, as if something was trapped in the foundation of the house itself. Elara locked her door and wondered what exactly she'd been sold into. Chapter 2. 3 days at the Blackwood estate had taught Elara several things. The coffee was excellent, the staff was polite but distant, and Adrian Blackwood was far more complicated than he pretended to be. She'd expected him to ignore her completely after their cold introduction. Instead, he'd requested her presence in his study each morning at 10 sharp to discuss practical matters regarding their arrangement. The bonding ceremony, he'd explained with clinical detachment, would take place within the month. They needed to coordinate details. This morning, she found him exactly where she always did, behind his massive mahogany desk, reviewing documents with the same intense focus he applied to everything. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting the sharp planes of his face and the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he concentrated. "You're staring," he said without looking up. Heat crept up her neck. "I was wondering if you ever smile." "Rarely." He set down his pen and finally met her eyes. "It's not a particularly useful expression in business." "This isn't business to you?" Something flickered across his features, too quick to interpret. "Sit down, Alara. We need to discuss the ceremony logistics." She'd grown to hate how he said her name, formal and distant, as if she were a client rather than his intended mate. But she sat, smoothing her simple blue dress. The staff had provided her with an entire wardrobe, all perfectly fitted and far more expensive than anything she'd ever owned. Another reminder that she was property now. "The pack elders will need 2 weeks' notice," Adrian continued, pulling out a leather folder. "The ceremony itself will be small, immediate family only. My father will perform the ritual binding." "Your father?" Alara frowned. "I thought pack law required neutral elders." "The Blackwoods have certain accommodations." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My father leads our pack. He'll officiate." Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. There was tension there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. "You don't get along with him." "My relationship with my father isn't your concern. If he's going to bind us together, it seems like it should be." Adrian's hands stilled on the papers. When he looked up, his dark eyes held a flicker of something that looked almost like approval. "You're more observant than I expected." "Than you hoped, you mean?" This time, his mouth almost curved into what might have been a smile. "Almost. Perhaps. But it doesn't change anything. The ceremony will proceed as planned." "And after?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "What happens between us after we're bonded?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Adrian's gaze dropped to her lips, then snapped back to her eyes so quickly she might have imagined it. "We fulfill our contract," he said finally. "Nothing more, nothing less." But his voice had roughened slightly, and Alara felt an answering flutter in her chest. Her wolf stirred, drawn to the wildness she sensed beneath his controlled exterior. A sharp knock interrupted the moment. "Come in," Adrian called. An older man entered, tall, silver-haired, with the same piercing dark eyes as Adrian but none of his carefully maintained composure. This had to be Marcus Blackwood, and the tension in the room immediately doubled. "Adrian." His voice carried the kind of authority that expected immediate obedience. "Miss Sullivan." Alara started to rise, but Adrian's sharp gesture kept her seated. Interesting. He was protecting her from having to show deference to his father. "We weren't expecting you," Adrian said, his tone cooling several degrees. "Clearly." Marcus's gaze flicked between them, calculating. "How are the preparations progressing?" "On schedule." "Good. I trust there won't be any delays?" "Time is rather pressing." Another meaningful look passed between father and son, loaded with subtext Alara couldn't decipher. But she caught the slight tightening around Adrian's eyes, the way his hands clenched almost imperceptibly. "There won't be delays," Adrian said. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Excellent. I'll leave you to your discussions then." He paused at the door. "Oh, and Miss Sullivan? I do hope you're finding your accommodations comfortable. The East Wing can be quite lively at night." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Alara staring at Adrian. What did he mean by that? Nothing. But Adrian had gone rigid, his knuckles white where he gripped his pen. "My father enjoys being cryptic. Those sounds I've been hearing. Old pipes. This is a very old house." His tone brooked no argument, but Alara wasn't convinced. She'd grown up in pack territory. She knew the difference between settling house sounds and something alive. "Adrian." That's enough for today. He was already reaching for his phone, effectively dismissing her. Mrs. Hartwell will escort you back to your rooms. Frustration bubbled up in her chest. Every time she got close to something real with him, he shut down completely. You can't just dismiss me every time I ask questions you don't want to answer. Watch me. But when he looked up, there was something almost like regret in his eyes. Some things are better left alone, Elara. She wanted to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. Instead, she stood and walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I don't think you're as cold as you pretend to be. His sharp intake of breath followed her out of the room. That afternoon, Elara found herself wandering the mansion's main floor, officially exploring but really trying to understand the puzzle that was Adrian Blackwood. The staff nodded politely as she passed but offered no conversation. It was like living in a beautiful museum, impressive but utterly lonely. She was heading back toward the stairs when she heard voices from a partially open door. Adrian's voice, and another man's she didn't recognize. The quarterly reports show another 15% increase, the stranger was saying. At this rate, the expansion into the European markets will be ahead of schedule. Good. Adrian's voice was sharper than usual, more decisive. What about the Seattle project? Construction is on track, but the zoning committee is asking questions. They want to know why we need such extensive underground facilities. Tell them it's for wine storage. Rich people love their wine cellars. The other man chuckled. And if they dig deeper? They won't. I've made sure of that. There was something in Adrian's tone that made Elara's skin prickle. This wasn't the voice of the controlled, formal man she'd been meeting with each morning. This was someone harder, more dangerous. What about the girl? The stranger asked. Elara's breath caught. What about her? But there was an edge to Adrian's voice now. Your father seems to think the timeline is critical. If she doesn't conceive quickly, she will. The certainty in Adrian's voice made heat flood through her unexpectedly. That's not your concern. Of course not. It's just, the pack elders are asking questions about the delay in the ceremony. Some are wondering if there's a problem with the arrangement. Let them wonder. The ceremony will happen when I say it happens. The conversation was clearly ending. Elara hurried away, her mind racing. There was so much subtext in what she'd heard, layers of meaning she couldn't quite grasp. But one thing was clear, Adrian Blackwood was far more powerful and dangerous than he let on, and there were people watching their arrangement very closely. That evening, she couldn't settle. The howling from below had started again, more insistent than usual. Against her better judgment, she slipped out of her room and made her way through the dimly lit corridors of the East Wing. The sounds were definitely coming from the lower level. She found a servant's stair that led down to what must be basement level, following the sound of her own heartbeat and something else, something that called to her wolf. The basement was a maze of stone corridors lit by widely spaced electric bulbs. The air smelled of damp stone and something wilder, fur and musk, and barely contained violence. The howling was louder here, coming from behind a heavy steel door at the end of the longest corridor. Elara approached cautiously, her enhanced senses on high alert. The door was reinforced with steel bands and secured with multiple locks, but she could see claw marks gouged deep into the metal. Whatever was behind that door was strong enough to damage steel and desperate enough to keep trying. She pressed her ear to the door and immediately jerked back. The sound wasn't random animal howling. There was intelligence in it, a pattern that almost sounded like communication. Footsteps echoed in the corridor behind her. Elara spun around, expecting to see Mrs. Hartwell or one of the other staff members. Instead, Adrian stood at the top of the stairs. Standing. Not in his wheelchair, not leaning on anything for support. Just standing there in jeans and a dark sweater, looking perfectly stable on his own 2 feet. Their eyes met across the distance, and Elara saw the exact moment he realized what she'd seen. His face went completely blank, all emotion carefully erased. You're not paralyzed, she whispered. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the continued howling from behind the steel door and the thundering of Alara's own heartbeat. Then Adrian's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not. The wheelchair is a very effective way to appear harmless." He started down the stairs, moving with a fluid grace that was definitely not human. "The question is, what are you going to do with that information?" Alara backed against the steel door, her mind reeling. "Why are you lying? What are you hiding?" "More than you can possibly imagine." He stopped just out of arm's reach, but she could feel the heat radiating from his body, catch the wild scent that made her wolf pace restlessly. "And you're going to stop asking questions and go back to your room?" "Like hell I am." The words came out stronger than she felt. "I have a right to know what I've gotten into. You have the right to be safe, fed, and comfortable until you fulfill our contract. Nothing more." Behind her, the howling suddenly stopped. In the abrupt silence, she could hear Adrian's breathing, slightly faster than normal. Could smell his scent, sharper now with what might have been desire or danger. "Please," she whispered. "Just tell me the truth." For just a moment, his careful mask slipped. She saw longing there, and regret, and something that looked almost like pain. "The truth would terrify you," he said softly. "And I won't be responsible for that." Then he was moving, faster than any human could move, backing her against the steel door with his hands braced on either side of her head. His body caged her in, solid and warm and definitely not disabled. "Go back to your room, Alara." His voice was rough, almost desperate. "Lock your door and don't come down here again." "And if I don't?" His dark eyes dropped to her lips, and she saw his control wavering. "Then I might do something we'll both regret." The air between them crackled with tension and unspoken possibilities. Alara's wolf was practically purring at his nearness, drawn to the dangerous wildness she could sense beneath his human facade. "Maybe," she breathed, "I'm tired of being protected from the truth." Adrian's control snapped. His mouth crashed down on hers, hot and demanding and nothing like the cold, controlled man she thought she knew. Alara melted into him, her hands fisting in his sweater as she kissed him back with equal desperation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "This changes nothing," he said roughly. "Everything," she corrected. "This changes everything." Behind them, something began howling again, long, mournful sounds that seemed to echo their own confusion and desperate need. Chapter 3. "We need to talk." Alara's voice was steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "Now. No more lies, no more evasions. I want the truth." Adrian stepped back, running a hand through his hair in the first truly unguarded gesture she'd seen from him. In the dim basement lighting, he looked younger, more vulnerable. And definitely, unmistakably, not disabled. "You don't understand what you're asking for," he said quietly. "Then explain it to me." She crossed her arms, drawing on every ounce of stubborn determination she'd inherited from her mother. "Start with why you've been pretending you can't walk." "Alara. Is your name even Adrian? Or is that a lie too?" Pain flashed across his features. "My name is Adrian. Everything else." He trailed off, seeming to struggle with where to begin. "The wheelchair isn't about deception. It's about survival." "Whose survival?" "Everyone's." The words came out rough, desperate. "Mine, yours, every person in this house." The howling behind the steel door suddenly intensified, rising to an almost frantic pitch. Adrian's head snapped toward the sound, his entire body going rigid with tension. "We need to get out of here," he said, reaching for her arm. "Now." But Alara pulled away from his grasp. "No more running away from questions, Adrian. What's behind that door?" "Something that will give you nightmares for the rest of your life." "I'm stronger than you think." "You're not strong enough for this." His dark eyes were pleading now. "Trust me. Please." The desperation in his voice almost swayed her. Almost. But 3 days of careful lies and calculated distance had taught her not to trust his words, only his actions. And right now, every line of his body screamed that he was terrified. She took a step toward the steel door. "Elara, don't." The sound of rending metal cut off his words. Elara spun around to see the reinforced door buckling outward, the steel bands groaning under some massive force from within. The howling had become a roar, deep, inhuman, and filled with rage. "Run." Adrian's voice was barely human now. "Run now." But it was too late. The door exploded outward in a shower of twisted metal and stone fragments. Elara threw herself sideways, feeling the rush of displaced air as something massive hurtled past her into the corridor. When she looked up, her wolf whimpered and tried to retreat deep into her consciousness. The thing standing in the wreckage of the doorway had once been human. She could see that in the basic shape, the bipedal stance. But everything else was nightmare: 9 feet of corded muscle and midnight black fur, claws that gleamed like obsidian knives, and eyes that burned with hellish red light. Its muzzle was elongated, filled with teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. This wasn't a werewolf. This was something else entirely. Something wrong. It turned toward her with predatory focus, and Elara felt her knees go weak. She'd grown up around shifters, had seen dozens of wolf forms. But this thing radiated a wrongness that made her every instinct scream in terror. "Lucas, no." Adrian's voice cracked like a whip. The creature's head swiveled toward him, and for just a moment, something almost human flickered in those burning eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by pure animal hunger. It lunged. Adrian moved faster than anything human should be able to move, intercepting the creature mid-leap and sending them both crashing into the stone wall with enough force to crack the ancient masonry. But even Adrian's enhanced reflexes weren't enough. Claws raked across his chest, tearing through his sweater like tissue paper and leaving dark streaks of blood on the stone behind him. "The sedatives." Adrian shouted at her, never taking his eyes off the creature. In the cabinet by the door, blue vials. Elara forced her frozen muscles to move, scrambling toward the ruined doorway. Behind her, she heard the sickening sounds of violence, snarls, the impact of flesh against stone, Adrian's sharp cry of pain. The cabinet was built into the wall, its glass front spider-webbed with cracks. Inside, she found rows of blue glass vials filled with clear liquid. Her hands shook as she grabbed 3 of them. When she turned back, her stomach lurched. Adrian was losing. He fought with desperate skill, using his human intelligence to compensate for the creature's superior strength and savagery. But blood streamed from multiple wounds, and she could see him slowing down. The thing, Lucas, he'd called it, pressed its advantage with single-minded fury. "Adrian." She held up the vials. The injector, black case, same shelf. She found it, a device that looked like a cross between a syringe and a dart gun. Her hands trembled as she loaded one of the vials, trying to remember everything she'd learned about emergency medical procedures during her PAC training. Behind her, Adrian screamed. Elara spun to see him pinned against the wall, Lucas's claws at his throat. Adrian's eyes met hers across the distance, dark, pained, but still utterly focused. "Whatever happens," he said, his voice strained but clear, "don't let me become like him. Adrian. Promise me, Elara. If I lose control, if I change, promise me you'll run." She raised the injector, trying to get a clear shot at Lucas without hitting Adrian. "What are you talking about? Just promise me." The raw desperation in his voice made her chest ache. "I promise." Adrian's eyes closed for just a moment, as if in relief. Then they snapped open, blazing with determination. "I'm sorry," he whispered. And then he began to change. It started with his bones. Elara could hear them cracking and reforming even over Lucas's snarls. Adrian's body convulsed, muscles bulging and reshaping as his human form dissolved into something else. Dark fur erupted across his skin, his face elongating into a muzzle filled with deadly teeth. But unlike Lucas's transformation, Adrian's change was controlled, precise. He didn't grow to the same massive size, and his eyes remained darkly human even as his body became something else entirely. Lucas released him in surprise, taking a step back. For a heartbeat, the two creatures faced each other in the dim corridor, one lost completely to animal rage, the other clinging desperately to human consciousness. Then Adrian struck. The fight that followed was beyond anything Alara had ever imagined. Two beings of incredible power and savagery, locked in mortal combat in the confined space of the stone corridor. But where Lucas fought with pure instinct and rage, Adrian's attacks were calculated, strategic. He was trying to subdue, not kill. It gave Alara the opening she needed. While Lucas was focused entirely on Adrian, she crept closer, the injector steady in her hands. She had one chance. If she missed, if the sedative wasn't strong enough, they were both dead. Lucas's claws found their mark, raking across Adrian's ribs and sending him stumbling. The creature roared in triumph, rearing back for a killing blow. Alara struck, driving the injector deep into the side of Lucas's neck and depressing the plunger. The effect was almost instantaneous. Lucas's roar cut off mid-sound, his massive body swaying as the sedative hit his system. He turned toward Alara, red eyes struggling to focus, then collapsed in a heap of black fur and muscle. In the sudden silence, Alara became aware of her own ragged breathing, the metallic taste of fear in her mouth, and Adrian's harsh panting as he slowly shifted back to human form. When the change was complete, he slumped against the wall, blood streaming from multiple wounds. His clothes were in tatters, his face pale with exhaustion and blood loss. Is he? Alara couldn't finish the question. Sedated. He'll be unconscious for hours. Adrian's voice was rough, barely above a whisper. Long enough to get him back in containment. Containment. The word felt strange on her tongue. That's your brother. What's left of him? Pain flickered across Adrian's features, not physical this time, but something deeper. Lucas hasn't been human in over 2 years. Alara stared down at the unconscious creature, trying to reconcile what she'd just witnessed with everything she thought she knew about werewolves. What is he? What are you? Adrian was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. We're berserkers. A genetic anomaly that crops up in certain bloodlines. When we shift, we... He swallowed hard. We lose ourselves completely. No human consciousness, no control, no recognition of friend or enemy. We become killing machines that destroy everything in our path until we're stopped. The words hit her like physical blows. But you were still you. You recognized me. For now. His dark eyes met hers, and she saw the terrible fear lurking there. I can maintain some control, but it's getting harder each time. Eventually, I'll end up like Lucas. Completely lost to the rage. How long? I don't know. Maybe months. Maybe weeks. He struggled to his feet, leaning heavily against the wall. That's why the wheelchair. Strong emotions trigger the change, and if I'm seen as weak, disabled, non-threatening, it reduces the chances of situations that might push me over the edge. Alara's mind reeled as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The arranged marriage. Your father didn't need money. No. Adrian's laugh was bitter. He needed hope. Omega wolves have a calming influence on their mates. The bond we'll share might help me maintain control longer. Might give me time to find a cure. And if there is no cure? His silence was answer enough. My God. She pressed her hands to her mouth, finally understanding the full scope of what she'd been sold into. You're dying. Not physically, but... Everything that makes me human is slowly being consumed by what I become when I shift. He pushed away from the wall, moving carefully toward his unconscious brother. The real Adrian Blackwood dies a little more each time I change. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have agreed to the arrangement if you'd known the truth? He knelt beside Lucas, checking his pulse with practiced efficiency. Would you have willingly bonded yourself to a monster? Elara stared at him, this man who'd been carrying such a devastating secret, who'd sacrificed his own mobility to protect others from what he might become. Who'd just risked his humanity to save her from his own brother. You're not a monster, she said quietly. Adrian's hands stilled. You don't know what I'm capable of. I know you just fought to save me instead of letting your brother kill me and solve all your problems. She moved closer, her fear finally giving way to something else, a fierce protectiveness that surprised her with its intensity. I know you've been torturing yourself with guilt and isolation to keep other people safe. Elara. And I know that what I felt when you kissed me upstairs wasn't fear. She reached out, her fingertips barely brushing his bloodied cheek. It was recognition. He leaned into her touch for just a moment before pulling away. You don't understand. The curse is progressive. Each time I shift, I lose a little more control. Eventually, I'll become exactly like Lucas, a creature that kills indiscriminately until someone puts me down. Then we find a cure. There is no cure. My family has been researching this for generations. Then we'll be the ones to find it. The certainty in her own voice surprised her. I'm not going to let you disappear into that rage. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, something like wonder flickering in his dark eyes. You're not running. No. She looked down at Lucas's unconscious form, then back at Adrian. I'm not running. For the first time since she'd met him, Adrian Blackwood smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. You're either very brave, he said softly, or completely insane. Maybe both. She helped him to his feet, acutely aware of his weight against her, the warmth of his body, the trust he was placing in her simply by letting her support him. But I'm not going anywhere. As if summoned by her words, footsteps echoed in the corridor above them. Heavy boots, moving fast. The security team, Adrian said, tension returning to his voice. They'll have heard the noise. What do we tell them? Nothing. They know about Lucas, about what we are. They're paid very well to keep our secrets. He looked down at his brother one more time, grief and determination warring in his expression. Help me get him back to his room. Then we need to talk about what happens next. As they struggled to lift Lucas's unconscious form, Elara realized that everything had changed in the span of a few minutes. The cold, controlling man she'd thought she was being forced to marry was gone. In his place was someone infinitely more complex, and infinitely more dangerous. But as she felt Adrian's hand brush against hers as they maneuvered Lucas through the doorway, she also realized she'd never been more certain of anything in her life. She wasn't going to let him face this alone. Chapter 4. 2 weeks after the incident with Lucas, Elara had learned to read the subtle signs of Adrian's struggle. The way his hands would clench when he thought no one was looking. The careful distance he maintained during their daily meetings, as if proximity itself was dangerous. The haunted look that crept into his dark eyes whenever they discussed the bonding ceremony, now only days away. She'd also learned that she was falling in love with him, which was either the best or worst timing imaginable. The blood work came back, Adrian said, not looking up from the medical files spread across his desk. They'd moved their meetings to his private study, away from the curious eyes of the household staff. Dr. Reeves thinks he might have found something promising. Elara leaned forward in her chair, hope fluttering in her chest. For the past 2 weeks, Adrian had been in contact with a specialist in rare genetic conditions, the first doctor willing to believe that berserker wolves were more than just legend. What kind of something? A potential treatment. Not a cure, but something that might slow the progression. Adrian finally met her eyes, and she saw the desperate hope he was trying to hide. It would involve regular injections of a synthetic hormone that mimics the calming pheromones produced by bonded omega wolves. Synthetic? Elara frowned. Why not just use the real thing? Adrian's expression shuddered. Because that would require maintaining a constant bond with an omega. The kind of deep, intimate connection that... He trailed off, looking away. That what? That would put the omega at constant risk. His voice was barely above a whisper. The stronger the emotional connection, the more violent my transformations become. If we were truly bonded, if I felt for you what I... He stopped, his jaw clenching. What, Adrian? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. What I already feel for you. The injections are the safer option. The words hit her like a physical blow. You're pushing me away. I'm protecting you. From what? From caring about you? Anger flared in her chest, hot and sudden. It's too late for that. Adrian's head snapped up, his dark eyes wide with something that looked like panic. Elara. I love you. The words came out fierce, defiant. I love your intelligence, your strength, the way you sacrifice everything to protect other people. I love the man who reads medical journals until 3 in the morning looking for answers. I love the way you say my name when you think I'm not listening, like it's something precious. Stop. Adrian was on his feet, moving away from her with jerky, desperate movements. You don't understand what you're saying. I understand perfectly. She stood as well, following him across the room. I love you, and that terrifies you because it means the synthetic treatment won't work. It means you'll die. The words exploded out of him, raw and anguished. If we bond completely, if I feel for you what I'm already starting to feel, the next time I transform, I'll kill you. And then I'll lose whatever humanity I have left. Or maybe, Elara said quietly, the bond will give you something worth fighting for. Adrian spun to face her, his control visibly fraying. You're gambling with your life. So are you. Every day you wake up, you're gambling that you can hold on to yourself for one more day. At least this way, we're gambling together. Something shifted in his expression, hope and terror and desperate longing all tangled together. Elara. She closed the distance between them, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. Trust me. Trust us. For a moment, he leaned into her touch, his eyes closing as if in pain. Then his hands came up to cover hers, his thumb tracing across her knuckles with heartbreaking tenderness. If I hurt you, he whispered, if I lose control and hurt you. You won't. You can't know that. No, she agreed, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. But I believe in you. I believe in us. When Adrian kissed her this time, it was nothing like their desperate encounter in the basement. This was soft, reverent, as if she were something infinitely precious that might break at any moment. Elara melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with all the love and hope and fierce determination in her heart. I love you too, he breathed against her lips. God help me, I love you too. The confession broke something loose in both of them. Adrian's careful control dissolved as he deepened the kiss, his hands tangling in her hair. Elara responded with equal passion, pressing closer until there was no space left between them. She felt the exact moment everything changed. Adrian went rigid against her, a low growl rumbling in his chest. When she pulled back to look at him, his eyes were no longer dark brown but amber, glowing with inhuman light. Adrian? Her voice was barely a whisper. He tried to step away from her, his hands shaking as he pressed them against his temples. No, not now, please not now. But it was too late. The change was already starting, his bones cracking as they began to reshape. This time, there was no control, no careful precision. This was the berserker transformation in all its terrifying glory. Run, he managed, his voice already distorting as his vocal cords changed. Elara, run now. But Elara couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch in horror as the man she loved disappeared into something monstrous. Adrian's body convulsed, dark fur erupting across his skin as he grew larger, more muscled. His face elongated into a muzzle filled with razor-sharp teeth, his fingers becoming claws that could tear through steel. Unlike his controlled transformation in the basement, this creature retained nothing human. Its amber eyes held no recognition, no consciousness beyond the need to hunt and kill. When it looked at her, Elara saw her own death reflected in those burning depths. The berserker lunged. Elara threw herself sideways, Adrian's massive form crashing into the bookshelf where she'd been standing. Books and broken would rain down as she scrambled toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She almost made it. Claws raked across her back, tearing through her blouse and the skin beneath. Pain exploded through her body as she was thrown forward, her head cracking against the doorframe. Stars burst across her vision, but she forced herself to keep moving, crawling toward the hallway on hands and knees. Behind her, the berserker roared, a sound of pure rage that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. She could hear it coming after her, its claws clicking against the hardwood floor. "Help!" she screamed, though she doubted anyone could hear her over the creature's snarls. "Somebody help me!" The berserker's weight slammed into her, driving her to the floor. Claws pressed against her throat, sharp enough to draw blood. This close, she could smell its wild musk, feel the heat of its breath against her neck. She was going to die. The man she loved was going to kill her, and there was nothing either of them could do to stop it. "Adrian," she whispered, closing her eyes. "I'm sorry." The pressure against her throat eased slightly. When she opened her eyes, the berserker was staring down at her with something that might have been confusion. For just a moment, something almost human flickered in those amber depths. Then gunfire erupted in the hallway. The berserker jerked, roaring in pain and fury as tranquilizer darts struck its massive form. It spun away from Elara, swiping at the security team that had appeared in the doorway. But there were too many darts, too much sedative in its system. Within moments, it collapsed in a heap of black fur and muscle. Strong hands pulled Elara away from the unconscious creature, voices calling for medical assistance. But all she could do was stare at Adrian's transformed form and wonder if the man she loved was still in there somewhere, or if she'd just watched him disappear forever. When she woke up, she was in a hospital bed in what looked like a private medical wing of the mansion. Her back was bandaged, her head pounding, but she was alive. "Barely. You're awake." Marcus Blackwood's voice came from the shadows by the window. He stepped into the light, his expression unreadable. "How do you feel?" "Like I was mauled by a werewolf." The words came out hoarse, her throat raw from screaming. "Where is he?" "Contained. Sedated." The transformation lasted nearly 6 hours this time. Marcus moved closer, his dark eyes, so like Adrian's but completely cold, studying her with clinical interest. "You're lucky to be alive." "Is he?" She couldn't finish the question. "Still human?" "That remains to be seen." The episode was more severe than anything we've recorded. Complete loss of control, no recognition of self or others. Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed, his movements precise and calculated. "Tell me, Miss Sullivan, what triggered the transformation?" Heat flooded her cheeks. We kissed." "Ah." Marcus nodded as if this confirmed something he'd suspected. "Strong emotion. The curse feeds on intense feelings, love, rage, fear. The deeper the emotion, the more violent the transformation. There has to be something we can do. Some treatment." "There is." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But it's not what Adrian has been telling you." Elara's blood chilled. "What do you mean?" "My son is a romantic, Miss Sullivan. He believes in love conquering all, in finding magical cures for genetic curses. The reality is far more practical." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her face. "The Blackwood family has been dealing with berserker wolves for over 2 centuries. We've learned that there's only one reliable method of control. Which is complete containment. Remove the subject from any situation that might trigger strong emotions. Keep them sedated, controlled, useful." His smile widened, and Elara felt ice forming in her veins. The family fortune was built on providing this service to other bloodlines cursed with berserker genes. "We contain the monsters, study them, and occasionally, breed them." "Breed them?" The words came out as a whisper. "Military applications, Miss Sullivan. A controllable berserker wolf would be worth billions to the right buyers. All we need is the proper genetic combination. Marcus's eyes glittered with cold ambition. An Omega bloodline with specific markers that can influence wolf behavior, combined with berserker genetics. Their offspring would have the strength and savagery of berserkers but with enough human consciousness to follow orders. Ilara's stomach lurched as the full horror of what he was saying sank in. That's why you wanted me specifically. Not just any Omega. Your bloodline carries extremely rare genetic markers, Miss Sullivan. Traits that have been bred out of most modern wolf populations. Your ancestors were the legendary wolf tamers, Omegas who could calm even the most savage beasts with their presence alone. My father. Her voice broke. He knew, didn't he? About what I am, about what you plan to do. Your father was paid handsomely to deliver you to us, yes. The gambling debts were real, but they were also convenient. Much easier to make you believe you were being sold to pay off his mistakes than to explain that you were bred specifically for this purpose. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Her own father had known she carried these genes, had known what the Blackwoods intended, and had sold her anyway. And Adrian, she whispered. Does he know? Adrian believes he's saving you by finding a cure for himself. He has no idea that his transformation is exactly what we've been waiting for. Once he loses complete control, which should happen within the next few weeks, based on tonight's episode, he'll be contained permanently. You'll bear his children, and we'll have our controllable berserker army. I won't do it. The words came out stronger than she felt. I'll never help you breed weapons. Marcus's laugh was soft, chilling. You don't have a choice, my dear. The bonding ceremony is tomorrow night. Once you're legally bound to Adrian, you'll be bound to this family. And if you refuse to cooperate. He gestured toward the door, where she could hear the soft whir of a wheelchair. Adrian appeared in the doorway, but this wasn't the man she'd fallen in love with. His eyes were vacant, unfocused, and there were restraints on the wheelchair that definitely weren't there before. What did you do to him? Ilara tried to sit up, ignoring the pain that shot through her bandaged back. Mild sedatives, nothing permanent. Yet. Marcus stood, smoothing down his jacket. But if you refuse to cooperate, if you try to run or interfere with our plans, Adrian will spend the rest of his short life in a drugged stupor. Is that what you want for the man you love? Ilara stared at Adrian's empty expression, her heart breaking all over again. He'd been right to fear his father, right to try to protect her. But now they were both trapped in Marcus's web, and she couldn't see any way out. The ceremony is at 8 tomorrow evening, Marcus continued, his tone conversational. You'll wear the dress we've provided, speak the words you're given, and smile for the cameras. After that, your only job is to produce the children we need. Refuse, and Adrian dies. Slowly. He moved toward the door, pausing to pat his son's shoulder with mock affection. Oh, and Miss Sullivan? Don't bother trying to reach Adrian right now. The sedatives we've given him suppress emotional responses. He won't remember loving you, won't remember anything that might trigger another transformation. At least, not until after the ceremony. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving Ilara alone with the devastating truth. Everything had been a lie. Her father's debts, the arranged marriage, even her own genetics, all of it carefully orchestrated by a madman who saw people as nothing more than breeding stock for his twisted experiments. And the man she loved, the man who'd fought so hard to protect her, was now a drugged prisoner in his own home. As Ilara stared at the ceiling, tears streaming down her face, she realized that tomorrow night she would either find a way to save them both, or she would become complicit in creating the very monsters that haunted her nightmares. The bonding ceremony was less than 24 hours away, and she had no plan, no allies, and no hope. But she had one thing Marcus hadn't counted on, the same stubborn determination that had made her refuse to run when Adrian showed her his true nature. She wasn't going to let Marcus Blackwood win. Not without a fight. Chapter 5. The bonding ceremony was scheduled to begin in 3 hours, and Ilara had spent every minute since Marcus left her room planning. Her back ached from the bandages, and her head still pounded from hitting the doorframe, but her mind was crystal clear for the first time since arriving at this nightmare mansion. She wasn't going to walk down that aisle like a lamb to slaughter. Not when Adrian was being drugged into compliance, not when other berserker wolves were imprisoned somewhere in this house, and definitely not when Marcus planned to turn their children into weapons. The wedding dress hanging in her closet was beautiful, ivory silk with delicate beading that probably cost more than most people made in a year. It was also a symbol of everything Marcus intended to steal from her, her choice, her agency, her future. She was going to burn it when this was over. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Hartwell with another passive-aggressive reminder about the ceremony. Instead, Adrian appeared in the doorway. But this wasn't the drugged, empty-eyed version Marcus had paraded in front of her. Adrian's dark eyes were sharp with intelligence and burning with barely contained fury. He moved into the room with fluid grace, shutting the door behind him with deliberate quiet. "You're supposed to be sedated," Alara breathed. "I've been building up a tolerance to their drugs for months." His voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "It takes a lot more than they think to keep me down." Relief flooded through her so suddenly her knees went weak. "Adrian, I thought, your father said you wouldn't remember." "I remember everything." He crossed to her in 3 quick strides, his hands framing her face with desperate tenderness. "I remember loving you. I remember nearly killing you. I remember my father's threats." His thumb traced across her cheek, and she realized she was crying. "I'm so sorry, Alara. For all of it. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault." She covered his hands with hers, anchoring herself to his warmth. "Marcus has been manipulating everything from the beginning. I know. I've been investigating him for weeks, trying to piece together what he was really planning." Adrian's expression hardened. "The drugs he's been giving me aren't just sedatives. They're specifically designed to increase emotional volatility and reduce impulse control. Every injection has been making the berserker transformations worse. He's been sabotaging your recovery. More than that. He's been creating the problem he claimed to be solving." Adrian pulled away, beginning to pace with predatory restlessness. "I found his real research files. He's not looking for a cure, he's perfecting a trigger. A way to reliably induce berserker transformations in any subject with the genetic markers." Alara's stomach turned. "The military applications he mentioned." "Exactly. And you?" He stopped pacing, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of awe and terror. "You're not just any Omega, Alara. Your bloodline carries traits that disappeared from most wolf populations centuries ago. You can do more than calm aggressive wolves." "What do you mean?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, as if struggling with how to explain. "During my transformation yesterday, when I was completely lost to the berserker rage, there was a moment when I felt connected to something. To someone. I could sense your emotions, your thoughts. For just an instant, I wasn't alone in that darkness." Alara's breath caught. "I felt it too. When you hesitated before the security team arrived, it was like I could reach you somehow. The wolf tamer bloodline doesn't just produce calming pheromones. According to Marcus's research, your ancestors could share consciousness with their mates during transformations. They could literally pull someone back from complete berserker rage by joining their minds. That's impossible. Is it? You've been having dreams since you arrived here, haven't you? Dreams of running through forests, of hunting, of rage and violence that isn't your own?" Heat flooded her cheeks. She had been having those dreams, vivid, terrifying nightmares where she was something wild and dangerous. She'd assumed they were just stress reactions to everything she'd learned about Adrian's condition. "Those weren't dreams," Adrian said gently. "Those were echoes of my transformations. Your mind has been trying to connect with mine since the day we met. But I don't know how to control it. I don't know how to use whatever this is. Then we learned together." Adrian's voice was fierce with determination. "Because tonight, we're going to stop my father once and for all." Over the next hour, Adrian laid out everything he'd discovered. Marcus had been running illegal experiments for decades, capturing berserker wolves and using them as test subjects for his enhancement drugs. Lucas wasn't the only prisoner in the East Wing. There were at least 6 others, all driven mad by forced transformations and psychological conditioning. He's been building an army, Adrian explained as they studied the mansion's blueprints he'd stolen from his father's office. Controllable berserker soldiers that he can sell to the highest bidder. Our bonding ceremony isn't just about producing children, it's about testing whether your abilities can be used to control me during transformations. So we don't give him the chance to test anything. Elara traced the layout of the East Wing with her finger. We free the others first, then deal with Marcus. Elara, these aren't just imprisoned wolves. They're dangerous, possibly beyond help. Some of them have been in berserker form for years. Then we find out if this gift I supposedly have is real. She met his eyes, seeing her own determination reflected there. I won't leave them to be Marcus's lab rats. Adrian studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. There's something else. The bonding ceremony isn't just symbolic. According to pack law, once we're officially mated, Marcus loses legal guardianship over me. He won't be able to make medical decisions or control my treatment. But he'll still have physical control over both of us. Not if we're smart about this. Adrian's smile was sharp, dangerous. He's expecting a drugged, compliant version of me to walk down that aisle. He's not expecting the son who's been planning his downfall for months. They spent the remaining time before the ceremony mapping out their plan. It was risky, probably suicidal, but it was their only chance. As the sun set over the Blackwood estate, casting long shadows through Elara's windows, she found herself thinking about how much her life had changed in just a few weeks. She'd arrived here as a victim, sold by her father and trapped by circumstances beyond her control. Tonight, she was choosing to fight back, not just for herself but for Adrian and all the others Marcus had imprisoned. It's time, Adrian said, checking his watch. Are you ready? Elara looked at the wedding dress she'd left hanging in the closet, then at the simple black clothes she'd chosen instead. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. The ceremony was being held in the mansion's ballroom, a grand space with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the grounds. When they arrived, Elara was surprised to see nearly 50 guests, pack members, business associates, and what looked like several very dangerous men in expensive suits who could only be Marcus's buyers. Marcus stood at the altar in full ceremonial robes, his expression smug with anticipated victory. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Elara's black dress instead of the wedding gown, but his smile never wavered. Unexpected fashion choice, my dear, he murmured as she took her place beside Adrian. I trust you're prepared to honor our agreement? Absolutely, Elara replied, her voice steady. I'm prepared to honor all my commitments tonight. The ceremony began with traditional pack rituals, the calling of witnesses, the recitation of bloodlines, the formal presentation of the mating contract. Elara played her part perfectly, speaking the ancient words while her mind raced through their plan. Everything depended on timing. Do you, Adrian Marcus Blackwood, accept this Omega as your mate, to protect and provide for until death separates you? Marcus intoned, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of tradition. I do, Adrian replied, his eyes never leaving Elara's face. I accept her as my equal partner, my chosen mate, and the other half of my soul. The slight deviation from traditional wording made Marcus frown, but he couldn't object without disrupting the ceremony in front of his important guests. Do you, Elara Catherine Sullivan, accept this alpha as your mate, to honor and obey until death separates you? Elara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. I accept Adrian as my chosen mate, my equal partner, and the guardian of my heart. I bind myself to him not through obligation, but through love. Marcus's jaw tightened, but again, he couldn't object. The legal words had been spoken, even if the sentiment wasn't what he'd intended. Then by the authority of pack law and the blessing of the moon, I pronounce you. Marcus never finished the sentence. The ballroom's lights suddenly went out, plunging the space into darkness. In the confusion that followed, guests crying out in alarm, security shouting orders, Elara felt Adrian's hand close around hers. Now, he whispered. They moved as one, using the chaos to slip away from the altar and toward the side exit Adrian had identified earlier. Behind them, Marcus was shouting for lights, for security, for someone to find his son and new daughter-in-law. But they were already gone, racing through the mansion's corridors toward the east wing and the imprisoned wolves who were waiting for rescue. The power will be back on in minutes, Adrian said as they ran. We need to move fast. They reached the basement level just as emergency lighting flickered on. The steel doors were still damaged from Lucas's earlier escape, but Marcus had installed even heavier reinforcements. Adrian produced a set of keys from his jacket. Master keys, he explained at Alara's surprised look. I've been planning this for a while. The first door opened to reveal a cell that broke Alara's heart. A woman sat in the corner, her hair matted and her clothes torn. But her eyes, when they met Alara's, were still human. It's okay, Alara said softly, approaching slowly. We're here to help. The woman snarled, backing further into the corner. Alara could smell her fear, her confusion, the cocktail of drugs that had been used to keep her compliant. Without thinking, Alara reached out, not with her hand, but with something deeper. The same instinct that had let her sense Adrian's emotions during his transformation. Peace, she projected. Safety. Freedom. The woman's snarls faded, replaced by something like wonder. You're like the stories. The wolf tamers. Can you walk? Adrian asked gently. We're getting everyone out. They moved from cell to cell, finding 6 prisoners in various states of psychological damage. Some were too far gone, lost completely to artificial rage and trauma. But others, like the first woman, responded to Alara's projected calm. Lucas was in the last cell, and when Adrian opened the door, Alara's heart broke all over again. Adrian's brother was conscious this time, sitting against the far wall with his knees drawn up to his chest. He looked so young, so broken. Adrian? Lucas's voice was barely a whisper. Is it really you? It's me, little brother. Adrian's voice was thick with emotion as he entered the cell. I'm getting you out of here. I can't control it anymore. The rage, the hunger. What if I hurt someone? Alara stepped forward, ignoring Adrian's warning gesture. Lucas, look at me. When their eyes met, she reached out with her newfound ability, projecting every calming emotion she could muster. But this time, she did something more. She opened her mind, creating a bridge between Lucas's consciousness and her own. The connection was immediate and overwhelming. She felt his pain, his terror, the artificial conditioning that had been used to trigger his transformations. But beneath all that trauma, she found something Marcus's drugs hadn't been able to destroy, Lucas's essential humanity. You're not a monster, she told him through their mental link. You're a person who's been hurt. But you're still you. Lucas's eyes widened, filling with tears. I can feel it. The calm. It's like coming home. That's because it is, Adrian said softly, helping his brother to his feet. We're going home, Lucas. All of us. Footsteps echoed in the corridor above them, Marcus and his security team, finally tracking them down. Adrian cursed under his breath. There's no way out, he said. He'll have blocked all the exits. Then we don't run, Alara said, surprising herself with her own calm. We end this. Alara. I can feel them all, Adrian. Every wolf in this house. The prisoners, the guards, even Marcus, they're all connected to the same network of fear and control. She looked around at the freed captives, seeing hope in their eyes for the first time in years. But fear is just the absence of something stronger. Adrian stared at her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time Marcus learned what a real wolf tamer can do. When Marcus and his men reached the basement, they found all 7 prisoners standing free in the corridor, no longer cowering or snarling but standing tall with dignity restored. At their head stood Adrian and Alara, hand in hand, facing the man who had caused so much suffering. Impossible, Marcus breathed. They should be uncontrollable without the drugs. The only thing that was uncontrollable was your cruelty, Elara said calmly. But that ends now. Marcus raised a tranquilizer gun, aiming it at Adrian. You're still my son. You'll still obey me. No, Adrian said simply. I won't. What happened next would be talked about in pack circles for generations. Elara reached out with her abilities, but instead of calming the wolves around her, she did something unprecedented. She connected them all. Every wolf in the mansion, from the security guards to the terrified prisoners, suddenly found themselves linked to a network of shared consciousness. For the first time in years, they could feel each other's pain, each other's hope, each other's desperate desire for freedom. The guards felt the agony of the prisoners they'd helped torment. The prisoners felt the guilt and fear of men who'd been following orders. And Marcus felt it all. Stop, he gasped, the tranquilizer gun falling from nerveless fingers. Make it stop. This is what you've been doing to them, Elara said, her voice carrying to every corner of the mansion through their shared connection. This is what you've been doing to your own son. Feel it. All of it. The psychic feedback was too much for Marcus's mind to handle. He collapsed, overwhelmed by the collective trauma he had inflicted. Around the mansion, his security team was laying down their weapons, finally understanding the full horror of what they'd been part of. When it was over, when Marcus lay unconscious and his guards had surrendered, Elara finally let the connection fade. She swayed on her feet, exhausted by the effort, but Adrian was there to catch her. It's over, he murmured into her hair. It's finally over. But even as he held her, Elara could feel something changing between them. The bond they'd created during the psychic link was still there, still connecting them on a level deeper than either had imagined possible. Adrian, she whispered. I can still feel you. Your thoughts, your emotions. I know. His arms tightened around her. Is that okay? She looked up at him, seeing her own wonder reflected in his dark eyes. It's perfect. 3 months later, Elara stood in the same ballroom where their first ceremony had been interrupted. But this time, the space was filled with genuine celebration. The Blackwood estate had been transformed into a sanctuary for supernatural beings who didn't fit into traditional pack society. Former prisoners had become counselors, helping others heal from trauma. The mansion's resources were being used to fund research into ethical treatments for genetic conditions like the Berserker curse. And Marcus was serving a life sentence in a maximum security facility designed specifically for supernatural criminals. Ready? Adrian asked, adjusting his tie. He looked nervous, which was adorable considering they'd been mated in every way that mattered for months. I've been ready since the night we met, Elara replied, smoothing her actual wedding dress, simple, elegant, and chosen entirely by her. This ceremony was different in every way that mattered. The guests were friends they'd made, people they'd helped, wolves they'd freed from various forms of captivity. Lucas stood as Adrian's best man, healthy and whole after months of gentle healing. Even her father was there, sober for the first time in years and working to make amends for his betrayal. But most importantly, this ceremony was their choice. Do you, Adrian Blackwood, choose Elara Sullivan as your mate and partner? Lucas asked, having insisted on officiating. I choose her, Adrian said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. I choose her strength, her courage, her incredible heart. I choose to build a life with her based on love, not fear. Do you, Elara Sullivan, choose Adrian Blackwood as your mate and partner? Elara looked into Adrian's eyes, feeling their bond humming between them like a living thing. Through their connection, she could sense his berserker wolf, no longer a source of terror but an integrated part of who he was. He'd learned to work with his dual nature instead of fighting it, and she'd learned that her abilities were about more than just calming others. They were about creating connection, understanding, hope. I choose him, she said clearly. I choose his brilliant mind, his protective heart, his willingness to fight for what's right. I choose to build a life with him based on partnership, not obligation. When they kissed, sealing their bond for the second and final time, Elara felt their connection deepen even further. They were truly mated now, two people who had found each other despite impossible circumstances and chosen to create something beautiful from the wreckage of Marcus's plans. As they danced their first dance as a truly married couple, Adrian spun her around the same ballroom where they'd once been forced to participate in a ceremony designed to enslave them both. "Any regrets?" he asked, pulling her close. Elara looked around at their friends, their chosen family, the sanctuary they'd built together from the ashes of the Blackwood Empire's darkest secrets. "Only one," she said, rising on her toes to whisper in his ear. "I regret that it took us so long to realize we were always meant to be partners, not victim and savior." Adrian's laugh was warm, joyful, and completely human. "Then let's make sure we never forget that again." As they swayed together in the ballroom's golden light, surrounded by the people they'd saved and who had saved them in return, Elara reflected on how much had changed. She'd arrived at this mansion as property, sold by her father and claimed by a family with terrible secrets. She was leaving as a woman who had discovered her own power, chosen her own path, and found the love of her life in the process. And that, she thought as Adrian spun her around again, was the greatest transformation of all. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also, to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.